there's nepotism going on there. I'm not sure you would have made it, man.
No,
guys always have their sons and their boys.
As far as to get in as an announcer, you need to start number one, you're going to be a play-by-play guy because color guys have to be former players or like personalities. So you're going to be a play-by-play guy. But
you say color guys?
Yeah, a color.
Color.
Yeah, there's like the color commentator and there's the play-by-play commentator. So there's the play-by-play commentator is primarily calling the action and what's happening, and then the color guy is filling in the context.
When I played,
telling stories.
I used to hate pitching in this stadium.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay. How about that?
Yeah.
You never knew that?
No.
Oh,
you didn't know there's like two different.
No.
Oh yeah.
So think about that. Yeah, like
think about the next time you watch any game. Yeah, there's always one guy.
Some of the best color commentators actually didn't come from sports at all. They came from movies. Like, what's the movie with the girls that sing a cappella? What's that thing called? Pitch Perfect.
I
You guys
love
see
that movie.
I know about those movies because we had daughters, right? I haven't seen them all. I think there's like 3 or 4 of them.
Yeah.
The commentators for those competitions.
Elizabeth Banks.
Yeah.
The other guy.
Insane.
When they're like being satire about,
And then the other one is the one I think it's called Dog Show. Did you guys see that one? No. Jason Bateman, I think, is in that one.
Yeah.
Dude, like
hilarious.
Just fast forward to those parts where they're doing the commentating. It's so inappropriate and out of pocket. It's awesome.
Well, how about Jason Bateman as the color commentator in Dodgeball?
Oh, exactly.
What is it? Pepper Brooks.
Oh God!
Exactly.
Cotton needs new shorts.
Yeah. I feel like Steven would be really good at that. All right.
Oh yeah, and his sarcasm.
Only a little bit. He's sarcastic
and dry.
No, I love it. That's one of my favorite things about Steven. I crack up. Some people don't get it and don't get him, and I'm like, I'll take it all day.
That's fine. I've been dealing with that for a while.
Jumping right in. Today we are talking about correcting muscle imbalances. Very popular in like the personal training certification world, and certainly in big box gyms everywhere. I think when you start getting into the field of athletic performance early on, new coaches want to talk about this a lot, or they're always looking for all the things that people are doing wrong. Rather than what they're doing right and how to improve on those. And so this muscle imbalance thing comes up and it's a little annoying because I think a lot of people spend a lot of time talking about it and more time trying to quote unquote fix it or fix them, whatever those things are. And we're going to talk about that today. And I think it gets in people's heads. And I think there are some things that people can address when you think about the word or the term imbalance. What does that actually mean? I mean, I'm pretty imbalanced in a lot of ways. Physically, emotionally, psychologically, like
there's some emotion in that laugh.
I'm pretty imbalanced. So when we talk about like muscle imbalances as it relates to, let's say, human performance, let's just stick to the physical side of things. What are we really talking about here? So again, I mean, some of these like certifications, and I've been to a lot of them in the last 27-ish, 28 years. And as well as like in the institution of education, university and things like that, you start to hear about this stuff. And I think the longer you go, the more you recognize like, what are we really talking about here? Okay, this person is challenged. Does that mean they have an imbalance? So I want to talk, the right side stronger than the left side, their dominant side stronger than their non-dominant side. Does that mean they have an imbalance? What the hell does this even mean? And then with that, I've seen entire workout programs, protocols, models of how to train people based around correcting muscle imbalances. And then it to the extent where we hear the term corrective exercise, which I've been very cautious about using even on the show. I think there's things to help people get better at things. Does that mean we're correcting them or we're just making them better? I think there's two sides of that coin and how you're looking at it. So people have probably heard from somebody at some point that they have a muscle imbalance or they have an imbalance somewhere. And it's not that I've never used that word before, but I think when I use that word, and I think when this team uses that word, it's very specific. But it can also be looked at as like a buzz term or a buzzword or something that gets an emotional rise out of somebody to either insult them or make them have a fear or some type of an insecurity, which also drives them to maybe make a buying decision. And so that term gets used a lot. So anyhow, If you've ever been told you have an imbalance, a muscle imbalance or some type of imbalance physically, like what does that mean and how has that impacted you psychologically, emotionally, and then from a behaviors perspective in terms of how you approach your programming? So anyway, that's what we're talking about today, and hopefully we can clear this up for people. I'm sure we're going to hurt a few feelings. And when I say, if you've ever heard that, if you've ever been to a chiropractor or a physical therapist or maybe even an ortho, or again, your personal trainer that's on the floor at the gym, you may have heard this or been told you have one. So let's talk about it, and maybe you can reassess what that really means for you and what it doesn't mean for you. Where do you guys want to start? I think let's start with defining, like, what does imbalance mean? Yeah.
Are we saying imbalance to either side of the body, like left to right? Are we saying imbalance?
Are we saying asymmetries, or are we saying muscular strength?
It's all good questions.
Yeah. Man. Yeah. So let's define it. What do we want to talk about it as? Because I feel like that's two different directions we can go in this. So
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that's where the confusion starts to lie. So let's start with the term asymmetry. So I think largely speaking, like making a blanket statement, when we think asymmetries, we think of hypertrophy being different or muscle size being different in one girth, in one area of the body over the other. One of the things that we look at quite frequently and we see an asymmetry is in somebody's glutes, as an example. Big, powerful muscles, back of the hips there. And we see that, their dominant side or their non-dominant side may have a little bit more muscle on it, a little bit more hypertrophy. Let's put it that way, hypertrophy. So muscular size and volume, not necessarily more muscle tissue, more muscle fibers. Fibers are the same. How they've been impacted could be different. So you may have a bigger butt cheek on one side than the other. That's one of the ways I look at asymmetries.
Yeah, so I see asymmetries aesthetically, like you just mentioned, but then I also see asymmetries as far as within movement patterns. So as far as, let's just say, putting both of your arms overhead at the same time and you're standing behind somebody while they're doing this and you're looking at their shoulder mechanics and looking at their shoulder blades. Are their shoulder blades moving similarly in comparison to the other side? So what I'm saying is, are their shoulder blades moving outward and up the back and downward and together at the same time?
So there's
when there's overhead motion with the shoulder, when you're going up and then when you're bringing your arm back down.
So there's an asymmetrical movement pattern, right? And then there's asymmetries in terms of muscle girth size, if you want. So those are two different things. Could they impact one another? Sure. We'll talk about that. Were you going somewhere with the asymmetry thing?
I mean, I don't know. I think for me, just my opinions on this has gone so back and forth over the years as a coach, because I think I went through the stage of like, you must correct imbalances at all costs. But then, you mentioned athletes at the beginning of this. Like, good luck. We've talked about Steven being a pitcher. Like, okay, well, Steven always pitches with his right hand. So what are you going to either have him pitch with his left hand or try to do rotation always the opposite direction? And you're good luck trying to outperform or volume that side that he's constantly pitching on. So like, I think that's kind of come back from.
I was literally doing an exercise yesterday and noticing that to this day, more than a decade later, my right delt is still significantly larger than my left delt.
For sure. And that when you're moving in that way during your developmental years, like, you're going to have things that are structurally different about your body at this point, because you had that repetitive motion, and whether the motor pattern led to the different muscular development, like so how I honestly, my big statement on this is I teach people how to manage asymmetries if it leads to something that we don't want. So either pain or it's from an aesthetic point of view. Like, if there's a big discrepancy, you're like, hey, my right pec is way bigger than my left pec and I don't like how that looks. Yeah, there's things managing that. But humans are weird. We walk around doing things with one hand most of the time. Most people, right? We're pretty dominant on that. So good luck trying to find complete symmetry in your body.
Yeah. So that's a great point. I want to come back to that, but let's talk about the word imbalance.
Okay.
Right? As it compares to asymmetries. What do you want to say about that? Are they the same or are they different?
So I would say asymmetry versus imbalance. If we're talking about imbalance, muscular strength imbalance, that's one thing. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have a I guess, movement asymmetry, but you could, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you are.
Okay, so this is where we're getting into a very objective evaluation.
Because it also comes to as far as like, well, are you loading or are you unloaded when you're doing this?
So this goes, again, very objectively, we have to look at this and go, what is imbalanced? What do you mean by that? And so that was a really great descriptor of, okay, so you have more muscle on one side than you do on the other in this particular thing. Is that a bad thing, right? How is that impacting you? What is that a problem? And if you're trying to quote unquote fix it, or you mentioned the word corrective or corrected, I said corrective, but if you use the word correct, like what are we doing and why are we doing it? Mm-hmm. So again, just because you have a imbalance of something, which is very similar to an asymmetry, and if you the words I think can cross over a lot of times, they don't necessarily mean the same thing. We need to evaluate, like, just because it's bigger doesn't mean it's imbalanced, right? Is that a problem? And to your point, it depends, because if it's creating a problem, this was your point as well, Ryan. If it's creating a problem, if it's creating pain, if it's affecting other things within the quote unquote chain, right, that could be problematic, then we may need and want to address it. Sometimes it's not about correcting anything. It's just about keeping up with it, right? So I want to go back. So I think that's a good way of looking at it. Like an imbalance could be a couple of different things, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, and it doesn't mean it needs to be corrected. So let's just start with that. Mm-hmm. And then going back to what Stephen was saying there about his right side, versus his left side with his strength or specifically with his muscle size or muscle girth on that one side, like, why wouldn't it be? Specifically, and you mentioned, like, as you're an athlete, like calf, like gastroc, right, and soleus girth, right. When you look at the lower leg, like if you're a power athlete, a jumper, or like say you're a basketball player, right, and you're constantly leading or you're powering off that right side all the time, it's really natural to think about this. This makes sense. My right calf's going to be a little larger than my left calf. Why? It's getting more work, right? There's more volume. There's likely a little bit more intensity there that's going on that side. Those are the things that start to build more muscle, right? It's the same as doing weight training. Does that need to be fixed? It depends, right? Are we having issues on our left side, right? Is it, and again, going back, like, okay, well, if that's the case, like you're a sprinter and you're in the blocks the same way every time, like you're getting a little bit more from one side versus the other side at different points of your start, right? If you're a football player and you're constantly playing on the right side, if you're an offensive tackle, and you're playing on you're the right tackle, offensive tackle on that team, or guard or whatever, and you're constantly moving from the same position the same way, it's natural to think you're going to have some, number one, asymmetries, and it could create an imbalance in terms of your performance somewhere. But we need to know what imbalance are we seeing and how do we measure it? Mm-hmm. And so what are we objectively actually identifying here as a potential or quote unquote problem that's already arrived somewhere? And then how do we kind of unwind the sticky web of like, okay, well, what do we need to do here? So again, people hear like, oh, I've got this imbalance in my shoulder. What does that mean? You mentioned in the last podcast about rotator cuffs. Like I've got my right rotator cuff has a problem. Is it your rotator cuff? That's a whole other question. Yeah. Like, how do we know, right?
Well, and I think that my brain now is going to where there's comparing, bring up the calf size, or, we think comparing left gastroc to right gastroc. So there's that kind of muscle imbalance. But then when we talk about something like the shoulder, a lot of the asymmetry or the imbalances that we see are these muscles that need to fire in ways that create a good mechanic at the shoulder. So like we've talked about, rotator cuff issue might be an imbalance in your engagement of the muscles that move the scap, like the rhomboids or the serratus, things like that. My brain is also going to, I've mentioned that I had a little bit of a knee issue that I've been dealing with for a while. And I finally really figured it out that my lateral quad on my left side was overdeveloped, and it was actually making my patella, my kneecap, track laterally. And it was getting to where it was articulating, it would literally click, and it was getting to where it was getting a lot of swelling. So a lot of my rehab has been finding more balance by working on my medial quad. So that's something that is different, where finding symmetry around a joint and how it moves is different than making my right quad as big as my left quad, and that being the focus.
Oh man, that's such a great point.
Overactive, underactive. That's kind of what I thought when you guys mentioned muscle imbalance.
For sure. So two different things.
Yeah, but let's work from the platform of These are very natural things. And so again, we talk about nature versus nurture and how we can impact things. Like naturally, you're going to be that way. Good luck outdoing all of the nature.
You mean naturally one size is going to be a little bit larger?
Yeah, naturally,
than the other. Yes.
But you can nurture it in a way where you can train things. Obviously, that's what bodybuilders are doing constantly, right? They're always trying to find symmetry from the upper body to the lower body, from the right delt to the left delt, from the left pec to the right pec, all of those kind of things. Like that's what they're doing. And they're picking very specific movements or quote unquote exercises in order to do that, right? And focus on those in a different way. That's very different than somebody who, when we're looking at them mechanically, right, and how they're performing. So I think you got to back it up and go like, okay, well, I have an asymmetry or I have a quote unquote imbalance. How is that impacting me? Because if it's not impacting me negatively and I'm performing at a very high level, what is the risk versus reward of trying to overcorrect this thing for the sake of feeling better about having a bigger right pec or a similar size left pec as I do a right pec? You have to make those decisions. I can't make those decisions for you. But what we could measure is maybe how that's impacting your performance in some way through doing a very objective evaluation, which has some very specific parameters that we can repeatably test and track and get some data on. So we can, is that what people are doing out there? That's not what they're doing out there. Like there are some strength and conditioning coaches or human performance coaches that are certainly doing that to help people perform better. But it doesn't start with correcting imbalances. It starts with the larger picture, which is like, what is my strength? What does my movement look like? Number one, like what is my, how do I do that? Then what does my strength look like? That's the foundation for all the things that we're going to be doing in terms of expressing the movement and the strength through like things like speed and power, right? So, when you start to break all this stuff down, like again, I think it gets looked at there's too much of a blanket statement being made there. We have to actually look a little deeper. And if you don't have the ability to do that because you don't have the knowledge or the education to do that, then I think people start to get lost in the sauce of like, what's the right exercise to fix this thing in the gym or when I'm in the weight room or on the field or whatever else. And I think people get lost. And I think that's kind of what's happened with the term imbalance, muscle imbalances, again, to the point where we've got entire training models being built around fixing this stuff. And what are we leaving on the table for somebody who's trying to, number one, just be healthier. Number two, maybe it is an aesthetics goal. Or number three, maybe it's more of a longevity a performance goal. Like I'm trying to get better at this specific thing. And I know I'm going to be better at that thing when my time improves or my numbers improve or whatever. What is the objectively we're trying to get out of this? And so when, again, looking at imbalances, is it really that big a deal? So again, if I've been told I have an imbalance, where did that come from? Where like our clients coming in or people that we work with, where are they coming in self-identifying, or maybe somebody else has identified for them? What are some of the things that come up?
I mean, I think that's just like a very I can't think of the term, but someone trying to sell a product. That's a very big thing. I've even seen people comment in things online and stuff of like, oh, I'm waiting to lift because I have imbalances that I need to fix. So there's people selling programs of like, fix your asymmetries, fix your imbalances. And so it's like this catch-all phrase that people see a lot. And so they're either self-identifying. And I've had someone DM me too saying my hips are imbalanced. What do I do about it? And, and I think it creates a lot of fear around movement. And it creates a lot of ignorance around anxiety for sure too. And I honestly, if I think about it, I've gone through that in the past where I'm kind of hyper aware of my movement. And so I've gone to where like, oh man, my right shoulder is stronger on this. So every time I pick up a weight, I'm going to make sure I pick it up with my left. Like I've been that kind of like anal retentive about it. I don't know, like I've been very specific about that in the past, and it's built anxiety and hindered my progress, hindered my performance in the gym. And so I think a lot of people see that and they get scared by either reading it online or some professional telling them. So I think that's where a lot of it's coming from.
I think some of the other places it comes from is well, I had this injury at some point. which
yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Yes.
which created this thing for me for a while.
Yeah.
And as a result of that thing, now I have an imbalance. And okay, so before we start getting into correcting whatever you think your imbalance is, we have to get back to the root of what was that injury in the first place. And can we identify like how that happened, what exactly happened, where were you at that time, and what have you done since then to get here? Because a lot of times I see this corrective exercise to correct imbalances as the culprit for why somebody is further down the path of having this quote unquote imbalance in the first place. To your point, like my hips are imbalanced. What does that even mean? How did we evaluate this? What objectively, what are we talking about?
I mean, some people do a static like Faber test on your hip. Like this one has more external rotation and more internal rotation.
Weird.
Which almost every person has a varying degree of internal and external rotation on their hips. Like almost everyone you're going to see has some degree of that.
And just because you have that, does that mean you're not going to perform well or going to get hurt or injured?
And you should not lift in a weight until you fix that.
It's ridiculous. Yeah. I mean, we're laughing about it. Like we've seen it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, depending on, I don't know, the injury, where you are in life, as far as age and exercise history and all that stuff, and then what your rehab process was like. If you had an acute injury, let's say an ACL, depending on how you rehab that, it could be, you might never have the symmetrical look at your quadriceps. Like they might not ever look the same. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't perform and that you can't ski, that you can't run, that you can't lift or you shouldn't lift weights. I mean, you can still have strength. It's finding the balance to be able to
balance,
have longevity and do the things that you want to do.
For sure.
Right. And so what ends up happening is then it gets complicated, right? It gets really complex. Like everything, Stephen and I were just talking about this. Everything turns into a single arm, single leg. It looks like circus tricks out there on the weight room floor to try and fix something that doesn't need to be fixed and probably isn't ever going to get fixed because it's not broken. That's the thing. Like you're not broken, right? Because you have an asymmetry or this imbalance. You are normal. So how do we work in your normal, right? So we're not saying that there aren't issues, right? Like and issues can't be created from having some type of a muscular or strength imbalance. But if it's not an issue and you're not doing things it's not an issue now, and your goals aren't such that you're forced into maybe like a training program or movement patterns where this could manifest into something different, then why are we worried about this? Why are we having this anxiety? Like why are we fearful, and why do we think we need to divorce ourselves from these basic foundational movement patterns, these basic things, these basic principles that we end up violating basically at the end because we don't have time or we don't have the bandwidth or we're just fearful that we have to do these other things first or for so long, or it has to be this huge part of our program. You still need to be squatting and hinging and pulling and pushing. And you need to do that with 2 feet on the floor. You don't need to be on a BOSU, single arm, single leg, all this bullshit. There may be some value in that for you somewhere, but it's never going to be more than the foundational stuff.
And it should be a piece of the puzzle. It should be a part of the training. And I really want to go back to the point of a lot of these asymmetries, especially if we're looking from the lens, like we're kind of talking more about of like dysfunction. That term gets thrown around a lot as well, dysfunction. Oh, yeah. But let's say pain, it's managing his things. So it's not to say we see a lot, and Cece and I have talked a lot about this with different clients of like, you can get out of pain a lot of times by finding a little bit more symmetry. And if we even think about symmetry, again, when we go back to my example, my quad, I had an imbalance in my musculature on my quad, and that has made it where I do not have pain now because I have fixed that imbalance on left to left with different musculature. And, but it's managing, like I even think about that Cece had, we were talking about a client off air that she's had for a very long time. And I remember I've worked with this client before, and she always knows, she's like, okay, and just watch his right knee on when he does that squat because he shifts to this side. It's not that she's saying don't ever let him squat, but you don't want to let that asymmetry get carried away to where every time you're squatting, your butt's shooting out to the right side. you're managing these asymmetries, and that can keep you out of pain, but the ship is always moving forward. You're repairing the ship and you're managing it that you don't go off, off the cliff or whatever, but you're never stopping and completely, just getting off board, let's say.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point. And to that point, that client we're talking about, how long have you been training that client?
Or are we talking about the one that's
the one we were just talking
going
about?
on like 19 years?
19 years, yeah.
19 years. Does
Yes.
that mean that everything that Cece's been doing is wrong because he still shifts?
No.
That's the thing. I know goddamn well she hasn't done it wrong.
Yeah.
That's how that dude functions.
Yes.
Like it is. Like I can tell him we can work. I could do all the single leg isolated band work, Bosu, Dynadisc, RX mat, RX pad bullshit that you want to do. And it's just not going to change. We may make some improvements, but he's still going to have that. And to your point, it's about knowing your client, knowing yourself, right? If it's yourself that you're applying this to, and understanding how to work through it so that you can continue to build strength, you continue to build muscle. And if you want to work the speed and power and the capacity pieces, you're doing all that stuff. But again, like after 18 years of this stuff and there's not another coach in here that I've worked with, quite frankly, that can work to the level of depth to potentially fix an imbalance or an asymmetry like Cece has.
Yep.
And that guy is still doing the same thing he was doing 18 years ago. And guess what? Plays golf every day the same.
An asymmetric sport.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yep.
Goes out and he plays golf 4 or 5 days a week, still does the same thing. He can still bend over and pick up his grandkids, right? At 70 years old, right? He can still go out and enjoy himself and be active, comes in here, gets a great workout and, stays healthy. Got great cholesterol numbers, right? His heart rate's good. Like, he's got all these things are going for him. And he shifts when he does a fucking squat.
Yeah.
Like again, at the end of the day, I just think people just get so lost in this. And I get it. Like at first you start with like the basics, right? And then the further you go, a lot of times in education, obviously the layers start getting peeled back and you dig a little deeper and you start to understand a little bit more and you start to think about how your clients or your patients or, your people on your team are functioning like, oh, maybe that's why.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a good place to go.
Yeah.
Like for sure. That's a great place to go. But at the end of the day, like how deep do we go here? Because we still have to do the thing.
It's a deep rabbit hole.
It's a very deep rabbit hole. And I think the word you mentioned is ignorance. And you can get ignorant the further along you get in your path because you've forgotten the basics somehow, right? And those things always apply. And the basic premise here is like, look, that's just who you are. That's how you are. That's not to say we can't improve things, but I think more what you were saying is kind of managing things. Stephen had some recent experiences. I just want to turn it over here for real quick, just with kind of going through some programming and being able to examine that programming a little bit and how much focus was there. And based on your experience, all the experiences you had, kind of some of the things that popped up for you along the way through this experience.
Well, I mean, I guess it was just, it was a very well-known training certification. And as I was going through some of their recommendations for movements, as I've already been, working on the floor as a trainer for a year, basically, a lot of their recommendations, the first thing I was thinking was like, none of my clients can do this, even ones that are, the more fit ones. And it was a lot of, like single leg balance movements. And it was just kind of, the assumption was that these movements were a lot more accessible for a much broader population. So that was the big thing that we were talking about I was like, this doesn't really apply to a lot of people. Yeah.
And in that model, don't they kind of preach that they should be able to do these things? It's like a
it's a prerequisite.
Gatekeeping, right? So where you get the prerequisite before you should do these things, they must be able to do these things.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it was
stand on one leg for 30 seconds.
Yeah. To get very specific, was, that you should be doing a single leg squat assessment as part of like your initial assessment.
Yeah,
with a client.
absolutely. I'm going to have somebody do a single leg fucking squat for their initial assessment.
Yeah, somebody who's completely deconditioned, who can't stabilize bilaterally.
Yeah.
And I'm going to see how you're doing with your single leg squat, brand new deconditioned client. Like it's, we have clients who've been training here for years who are strong and can still maybe do one single leg squat. They still struggle doing a set of 10 and they've been here for years.
Yeah, that's the point. Like, that's the point is like the layers of the onion got peeled so far back, they forgot what the onion looked like in the first place. And so if you're one of those people that's been told you have an imbalance, or you recognize somewhere you have an imbalance, dig a little deeper to understand what that is and what that means. If you've got, like, if you have an injury, right, or you have a some type of a limitation mechanically, like your range of motion sucks, on one side versus the other, or something like that. You've identified that. Like, does it suck? Like, what does sucking mean, right? In that sense, and then how can we continue to work through our program to address it through the other things that we're doing versus abandoning your program and thinking you have to go through this other thing for so long. Because I guarantee you, here's what's going to happen. You're going to stay in that thing for a very long time. You might get some benefit out of it, but what have you left on the table in the short amount of time that we have on the earth, right? To be able to do the things that we want to do, that we like to do, and that we need to do. So anyway, this whole topic, again, came up a little bit about off of a discussion that we had, Stephen and I had, but also on some stuff that I saw some other people kind of posting about that I really liked. They were really bad-mouthing the whole terms. And I was like, they're not wrong. Like, they're not wrong about this, because I've done this a long time, and I got caught up in that at one point too. As things started to, I got a little deeper into it. I was like, oh man, well, maybe we should be spending a little bit more time over here. And then what you end up recognizing is you don't have that much time anyways, and that doesn't give you an excuse, to sign off on, your shit doesn't work right. However, what does working right actually mean? And think about, like, hey, you're that person. Right. So there's no one solution to any of these things. But if we can identify what your issue is, first off, do you have an issue, and what is it? Number two, like, is this issue affecting you somewhere? And if so, where? And then if we want to see improvement in this somehow, do we need to see improvement in this somehow? And then lastly, how are we going to know if it's actually improved or not? And then will that, again, that arrival point or that result that you're looking for, if that doesn't get to where you want it to be, or you think it should be, what does that mean? And so for you as the consumer, or the person that's applying this stuff to yourself, think about how that impacts you. More importantly, if you're paying somebody to give you programming and take you through this stuff, what does that mean for them if they've fixed you, right? And how does that play into the business part of this, and the attachment or the dependence that they have on you as a coach, or that you have on them because you're paying them to get you this thing that they told you, or get past this thing that they told you they have? Think critically about this, right? And just understand that, imbalances, asymmetries, these are very natural things, and they don't have to stop you from doing anything. And it doesn't mean you need to abandon your program. And it doesn't mean you can't do powerlifting or do Olympic lifting or go out and do speed training or endurance training. Understand that the basic things are the things that you need to be focusing on. Movement, strength, right? There's likely going to probably be, or you're going to want to improve on some speed and power things, because you're going to get a lot of benefit from that at a lot of different levels. And then how long can you do it for? The longevity piece, or you could look at that as like capacity. Like, how long can you do the thing you want to do the thing for? Dude's still playing golf 18 years later, and he's doing it better because he's stronger, right? He's more efficient. He moves faster through his golf swing. He has less pain. These are all good things. Like, if he wasn't doing these things, even with the fucking asymmetries, like, he might not be, because he had been stopped when he initially came to you, right?
Yeah, and I think he has a slap lesion.
Yeah, so his shoulder's fucked, right? Like mine and everything else, and he's still able to do all this stuff. So anyhow, at the end of the day, without beating it up anymore, like, okay, asymmetries, imbalances, totally natural. What are yours? Do they matter, right? Do you have to fix them? That depends. And, and at the end, are they causing you issues? And if you think the answers to that is yes, then what is the issue? And if all you can say is, well, I have an imbalance, you haven't dug deep enough, and we need to have a deeper discussion on that. So anyway, have a look at your programs, have a look at yourselves. Like, I think it's always good to check in. And sometimes it's good to check in with other people. And hopefully this helped you check in with maybe the thing that you think is such a bad thing that needs to be corrected isn't such a big deal after all.